Panieva's mute, numb state succumbs to no banal psychological analysis, but the shape of one's mother is nevertheless too important to simply overlook, even as she seemed to wish just that in everything she did. What was going on in the mind of that inconspicuous woman, with her hay bale hair, her big donut-fish eyes, her narrow hunting dog's nose, her lips in a pout? No one could even guess. It's possible that there was nothing there at all, neither resignation nor obstinance, but simply indifference. And not the kind of indifference that comes from a disinterest in the world and an excess interest in oneself, but that kind of entirely distinct carelessness, simple and natural, like a cat's. Some people have even heard Pani Makiewicz laugh. Perhaps we ought to dig back in time, ancestor by ancestor, for as many generations as anyone can remember. After all, today's conventional wisdom is that a person is formed in their first few years and the rest is just a varnish. Your character is finished, whatever it became. It is our collective mother who is ultimately guilty. Naked, ragged, primordial, her only legacy is a bad example to 100 millennia of mothers. And here we now are. The inscrutable Eva's own mother was a prima ballerina with calves like fossilized tree roots. She was almost never home, but when she was there, she had a strict gentleness and a very pedagogical bent. Children were her arduous life's crown, the quinta essentia of her life's fulfillment. Eva's father, if he is at all relevant to a discussion of guilt, was a chess player, not a player on the world scale, but a multiple-time Polish champion. He was a chatty, sociable man, and kind to children, but he did have some strange traits. He feared death and the dead so hysterically that he claimed a bad cold as an excuse to avoid his own mother's funeral. The housekeeper threw the dark obituary section into the wood stove before setting the rest of the day's paper on his table. Should one of his children fall ill, Eva's father resolutely abandoned the house until all the coughs, sneezes, and fevers had gone. Even though Pani Eva was adept at crafts, she had not actually been gifted with very much artistic sense. She put all her doilies and little rugs wherever they ended up, and she didn't care a jot for the overall impression. An oil painting of very florid flowers pinned up by thumbtacks, a monotype by Alexander Werner, and her own wildly colorful embroidery might all coexist peacefully just next to each other on the wall. She was also not a very good housekeeper. It isn't in any case necessary to accuse her or the hired help of this. Some just don't have the aptitude. Still, she did all the annoying and less annoying chores without complaint. She even cleaned the bathroom without a fuss. Absolutely every damp morning began with making porridge, which she would burn to the bottom of the pot, and several pots waited for scrubbing in a line on the countertop. Cleaning them required 2 days of soaking, a stiff metal brush, and a horse's patience. Another food the Pani could make in several different ways was the potato. She could slice fried potatoes so deftly as to make them basically transparent, and they melted in your mouth. On a little electric stove, she could turn old blue-spotted potatoes from the spring, potatoes for animals, into tasty human fare. Fried to golden brown and served with lard and onions, this dish was little Adam's favorite. The electric stove was set on the rusty stovetop, which was totally useless for cooking. The kind of thick logs it took had long ago ceased to be available in Warsaw. Or maybe they still were, but for whatever reason people heated their ovens and stovetops with briquettes, which was actually less of a faff. The apartment was always cold and filled with bitter fumes. Everything in it was oversized and too big for living, and Pani Eva was too small to keep it warm and orderly. It would be wrong to say that she didn't love her home, which was her husband's family property anyway. She was used to it, and it cannot be underestimated how strongly a person's habits pummel them. Although Jakub might occasionally remind her who was the master of the house, Eva did not allow herself to make too much of that. In fact, this big, cold apartment had grown much closer to her heart than it was to its indigenous inhabitants, who were visibly sick of it. Try living so many generations in the same place, knowing that nothing in it is the product of your life's work, but rather your father's, or your grandfather's, or your great-grandfather's. A young couple might count as their own only some overgarments and wool socks. At the beginning of Eva's married years, the older Pani was still alive. She was not actually a particularly old woman. Cancer took her early. Eva's patient character appeared especially clearly in caring for her mother-in-law. She had very poor digestion, which meant that she shut the pot full once a week, and the old pipes could not take such a large amount at once. In silence, Eva put on long rubber gloves, scrubbed the toilet bowl clean, and pushed the stone mass down the drain with a rod. In all, 4 members of the McKeowich family were known to have died in the bedroom, though thankfully not all in the same bed. They had a new bed, or almost new. It had been too soft for Eva's mother, the ballerina, so she shucked it off onto her daughter. It's interesting that no one seems to remember what happened to these earlier cots. There must have been several of them, and not one was left, unlike the huge cabinets, wardrobes, 3-paneled mirrors, thick-legged tables, pantries, bookshelves, armchairs, embroidery frames, and the other legacies of bygone generations, which were, to the last item, either in use or in a pile in the back rooms. Other people sent such awful junk to the dump, and found their homes so pleasantly light, airy miniature furniture. The shorter and narrower the legs, the better. Newer pieces were stylishly arachnid. Eva liked to sleep in. Jakob got up early, often at 5 or 6, and it was only then that his other half got any sweet sleep, even as he tramped down from end to end of the apartment with his long steps. Why do people live together and share a bed? The greatest joy is not laying next to anybody else's sweaty body. But it is as it is, and it's not for us to beat our brains out over it. When they're young, people do the things they need to do. They study, they're happy. Soon after, they find themselves a ball and chain during their wine and beer-sodded university years, and then everybody can see for themselves how they get on. Among their friends, Eva and Jakub were real exceptions. Everyone else had babies so soon. Somehow Eva stayed unconvinced and didn't have a son until she was 30. Then came age, apathy, and spending the time away. Or had that already begun before? Her main task in life complete, Eva took intense care that Adam ate his porridge and that he learned his letters. She read to him, wiped the snot from his nose, tied his shoes, pulled sweaters over his head, and, in a word, tended to her child with all the care and love that nature has conceived as the part of a woman. For that reason it was hard for her, as it is hard for every other mother, to send her son to school. New people are, after all, too helpless for their large stone schoolhouses full of wide, pockmarked stone staircases, bare halls, and gyms. This is where the school bell deafens your ears, where late, crestfallen children must give their names to the school monitor, where the teacher writes red marks into a diary, ruler left at home again, or praises, a poem well memorized, where all the other children are older and there are inconceivably many of them, where everybody's slippers swish and everybody runs, cackles, shouts, and jostles at the first opportunity as the teacher turns away, where they give you foul soup in a metal bowl in the cafeteria, cabbage or fish, and you have to eat it with an aluminum spoon, and the food has a watery metallic taste, and everyone stuffs their pockets with bread and nibbles it between classes, or else makes spitballs out of it. Where you have to sit up straight on your bench and be quiet with your hands on the desk, and where everything is done only after the teacher tells you to. Open your notebooks and turn to page 56 in your textbooks. And your pen leaks ink and stains your hand and book, and good on you if it stops there. Ink is a horrid invention. Except for some especially dull ones. Everybody does try to be good at the beginning, but this goody-two-shootedness gets lost somewhere, evaporates into nothing, and in its place comes rowdiness, mutiny, and listlessness. When school starts, a kid has a backpack in which are notebooks, the kind where the paper comes separate and moms have to prep them from morning till night, gym clothes, and another bag for slippers because if the slipper bag is in the kid's hand, it'll be forgotten somewhere. After a year or so, no one wears a backpack anymore. Everyone goes out with a briefcase, or a kind of sack. The older and more respectable, the better. Nobody brings much of anything else, and everything that comes out of these bags is tattered, doodled, and jumbled. If these textbooks ever get brought back to school at all, they are considered void, lest the degenerate students try to repair them with tape and erasers in a springtime wave of repentance. All those beards drawn on, all those lewd doodles. As said before, Adam went immediately into second grade. His mother thought that there would be nothing for him to do in the first, given that he knew the alphabet and had already read all of Sienkiewicz's trilogy. This meant that while all the other children had already known each other for a year, Adam was new, foreign, and strange, and he stayed that way. His homeroom teacher wore dresses with pastel colors, light like the way balloons lose their colors when inflated. She had a round body and kindergarten teacher manners. She was also a moron, an utter incompetent, who believed that only mammals were animals, that plasticine was spelled plasticine, and that declension was optional. Understandably, Pani saw her only a few times a year, at events and parent meetings, and she always wore pastel colors, her light hair tidily curly. She was blushing and joyful. Yes, Adam is progressing nicely, but he isn't particularly social. He doesn't participate in any activities outside of class, and doesn't come on field trips. Why doesn't he come on field trips? Don't you allow him to? We're going to Oikoski National Park this year. Bully him? Really? I certainly haven't seen any of that. We keep very strict order in class, the teacher said, observing Eva with a doubtful expression. Of course they all take their children's side, like lionesses, but school is school and will stay that way. The lioness territory doesn't stretch this far. And that was all. Eva learned nothing more of her son's new life. For almost a whole year she sent him to the school and picked him up at the end of class, for though the way to school was quite safe, at one point you had to get across a busy street where there was no stoplight or overpass, and sometimes you had to wait a while and stalk the moment to fly across. Adam was so spacey. He'd have walked out in a daze, or stood at the side for too long and too cautiously. It was a subtle art, weighing the risk and crossing the street at just the right moment. If you asked Eva what she remembers about her son's first years at school, her gaze will wander and she'll answer nothing for some time. She'll see in her mind's eye very wide stone steps that lead to a black and white checkerboard stone floor, which is in front of a cloakroom in a semi-basement. The doors of the cloakroom are metal mesh, and everywhere is the smell of chalk. Maybe this chalky, wet blackboard razor smell reminds her of her own forgotten childhood. Slices of sunlight shine down from above the staircase onto the steps, a kind of triangular glowing notebook. She stands in the dark corner of the foyer, awaiting the day's end bell, when a shouting swarm of children will flow down the stairs and she will find, at a glance, one skinny body and blonde head who is carrying a brown school bag that is too heavy. The bag is stuffed so full that one zipper hasn't closed. One year, they started locking the cloakroom because things were going missing from the school. Each child had to pay for a key, but Adam did not accept the idea. If we have free education, then that means you don't have to pay. Not for keys, not for notebooks, and not for field trips, he explained calmly to the homeroom teacher. From then on, he took his overclothes to class with him. After 2 weeks of abuse, the boy still did not take a key, but held tight to his civil disobedience, so the class ignored the robe hanging over the back of his chair and stopped bringing it up. That was a victory over the system, and one mustn't undervalue its importance. When one attempt has gone well, one can quietly continue to hollow things out, no? If you don't color in your blank map, will they make you do it over the summer? The end of the first year was immortalized in a photograph of Adam in front of the door of the school. He is a tall boy with a very thin neck, a nice blonde head of hair, and pants that are too wide, but pulled in by a belt. In his hand is an open report card made shining by the sunlight, which is reflecting lightly onto his smiling face. He is a happy schoolboy, happy that school is over and that summer and freedom are ahead of him. You can sleep for as long as you want at home, read what you want, play with your rabbits, or play Durak with the girl next door, draw or make mud dumplings, and do only what actually interests you. Mom will make porridge, tuck you in at night, and sit on the edge of your bed. They'll whisper together, and it goes without saying that it will be sweet to simply be. A week or so later, they'll all go to the country. Eva doesn't like being in the country, but a child has to get fresh milk, yellow butter, and fresh honey, has to see lambs and cows, frighten the neighbor's chickens, go swimming, get a bee sting on the sole of his foot, hold a lizard in his hand by the tail, and see moths and caterpillars and worms and potato bugs.